Traveling the Vortex. Side Trip.
Welcome to Side Trip number 22. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
And we are joined by author Jonathan Cooper, who wrote Lethbridge-Stewart's The Showstoppers. Welcome, Jonathan.
Welcome, Mike. Thank you. Welcome to all the listeners, and thanks for having me here.
So, how did you get into writing, Jonathan?
It's something I've done, I think, for quite a long time. I think I can remember being a kid and always writing, always putting, ideas into stories, and I think I graduated up from much shorter stuff, literally, short stories, probably even stuff less than a page when I was a lot younger, until and developed that, and it sort of got longer and longer until I was working on books. I sort of started doing it a bit more seriously when I started university, I think, maybe out of more pretension than talent. Just been working away at it ever since, really.
Are you a fan of the Doctor Who universe?
Oh yeah, and I have been for many years. As I say, my brother is visiting me at the moment. I live over in Amsterdam, and he's not even too much into sci-fi. But we had a few beers in Amsterdam. We came back and we put on Pyramids of Mars because we always watch when we were kids, and so quite happily sitting there, a little worse for wear, and just all the memories coming back with that, because we used to watch it a lot when we were children, I've sort of grown up with it as well, and been a fan for many years. So.
Now, had you written anything published or even unpublished in the Doctor universe before?
I think I did one short story which was going to appear on another website for a friend of mine, which was, I think, a Ninth Doctor and Rose story. But I don't think it ever got published in the end. But besides my own, a few random scribblings here and there, not really. Like, much as a fan as I am, I never really wrote any Who fiction, which seems weird now I think back about it.
Well, you took to it pretty easily, it seems to me. Was it an easy task to kind of write within this realm, not just the Lethbridge-Stewart realm, but within the realm as a whole, especially as well known as a lot of even these characters are within the universe?
It's interesting because I quite welcome having what's the word, like limitations placed on what I'm writing. So to work with the set characters that Andy had already developed, as well as you've got Lethbridge-Stewart, who's such a strong character. And I'm pretty sure Andy was asked a similar question and saying, was it difficult to write for the Brigadier? It's like, no, because he already seems so fully formed in your head and so strong a character. It's not actually that difficult to get into that space. So certainly writing for Lethbridge-Stewart I enjoyed. And again, I think you have to be careful. Certainly there's a feeling at the back of your head quite a lot of the time that you've got to stay faithful to this character because he's so, he's so loved by all the fans. So that's definitely something to think about.
Was the temptation strong to, I don't know, maybe pepper in some additional Who universe stuff that you kind of had to toe that line between what they have the rights to and what they don't?
Yeah, of course. And I don't know, I tend to shy away from putting too many references in, I think. I enjoy them, but I've certainly read quite a lot of Who fiction, and I think a lot of the EDAs were quite guilty of this, and certainly some of the Virgin NAs as well. There was this sort of case of geeky one-upmanship, with people wanting to put these sort of most obscure facts that they can in. I always find that a little off-putting because it kind of takes me out of the reading of it. It's like, I see what you're referencing there. And I know that's utterly hypocritical of me with all the kind of Underwater Menace references in there. Hopefully they're so sort of big and silly I'll be able to get away with it. But there's little things as well that I did want to tie up. So I allowed myself the one geeky bit with the Dwarf Star Alloy towards the end. But that always, like, one of the things that really annoyed me with sort of Day of the Moon. It's like, where did I get that from? I want to know how the US government got all this, mysterious alien metal. And so hopefully, like, there's a little line in there that explained it. But that always bugged me, and hopefully I've rectified that now.
I think as fans, there's always a certain threshold of how much little wink and nods to other Doctor Who references that you can get away with before it kind of feels forced. And yours doesn't do that. It seems to be the right balance.
That's good to know. Yeah, and you're right. It definitely can feel forced, and I think some of it, certainly with on occasion, it can feel a little bit like showing off. It's like, here's how much I know. Here's like the most obscure little bit of trivia that I can sneak in. And yeah, I think again, it's the kind of thing that can just take you out of a story, and it almost like it's showing, like, you can see the seams. Does that make sense? When you have that in a book, you say like, oh, like I see what you're doing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm hopefully more interested in just getting a story together and getting a nice pacing and rhythm. And I think some of those little references that are peppered in like that can take you out of that occasionally.
Well, let's talk more specifically about the Showstoppers. Where did you formulate this idea from? Where did it come from?
Well, this is interesting because, as I was saying earlier on about limitations and placing them, the whole idea of having a story set in a TV studio was Sean Russell, the Candy Jar head honcho, head publisher guy, because he had actually worked with, I think it was for ATV, certainly with like ITV. He'd worked in these studios back in the day, so he knew a lot about it. And so he said to us, or said to me, or to Andy, like whether I'd like to write a story set in this environment, just because he thought it was something, that might be interesting. And obviously, that then you can use all these, all the references and all these, it was a very rich time, I think, for TV with Lou Grade, and it had these fantastically imaginative television shows coming out. So yeah, I think working in that environment, because I think it's quite rich. There's quite a lot you can do there with it, and obviously you can have a bit of fun with it as well. So yeah, having that placed on me, I think was very positive, because then, if you're aware of the limitations, then you can kind of say, okay, well, then how far can I push this? What can I do within these boundaries? And I think that can actually help you be a little more imaginative and a little more creative with the stuff that you're doing. Uh-huh. So yeah, but pretty much the idea of the TV studio was Sean's idea. And then I sort of ran with it basically and started creating all these crazy characters that might inhabit that kind of world, and put them all together and kind of see what happens eventually.
One of the great things I loved about it was the fact that there's this actor who appears to have all these certain characters, and we're kind of clued in early on that, well, this is kind of a sci-fi book. It's obviously some sort of duplicate, but the joy in the story is you come up with several, well, maybe it's this, as you unravel the story until you finally get the revelation. And then it's so satisfying that whatever you had thought it might have been before, just you're glad it wasn't that, because the actual end result is so great. I think I definitely did that, like wanted to leave little hints, and maybe people would start thinking like, oh, well, is it clones, or is it something, is it a kind of time travel thing? Is he going sort of back and forth? And yeah, there definitely are small red herrings that I placed in there. I wanted, and I think you guys picked it up, which is one of the things that I really enjoyed about the earlier podcast as well, when you're saying quite early, you clicked that it was duplicates. It wasn't the same guy dressing up and running around. And yeah, having that, like planting that seed early on in the reader's mind, I think was important for me. But then again, you can have some fun with it. I mean, the ultimate revelation is it's a Nazi jellyfish, which is absurd in so many ways. So actually giving these, you can have more fun with it, because when you're building up to something that's so utterly absurd, you can make the things that come before that slightly absurd as well, I think. So yeah, it was just sort of plotting it in that way did give me a lot of freedom, I think, to have more fun. And I was always looking for those little
little opportunities to have some fun with it, and possibly lead the reader down the garden path a bit. Right?
You played with it masterfully, because I tend to cue into things. I feel like I cue into things a little earlier than some. And man, I bit hard on every single breadcrumb that you threw out there, and I went down all the garden paths, going, yeah, maybe it's this. No, that's not it. Oh, maybe it's this one. No, that's not it either. So masterfully done there.
Thank you. And also, actually, we've got, I think, probably Andy to thank for that as well, because I think you guys are probably going to read a copy of it at some point. We've got the Havoc Files 2 coming up.
Yes.
Which is all the collected short stories. But in that, we'll be publishing for the first time, actually, 2 interludes, which are in the book, which was basically the history of Schadengeist and the siphonophore creature. And I think the first one came directly after Hansen, when he shows them the picture of Schadengeist from sort of 1929. And I think you actually got the first interlude right after that, which basically it gave the ending away. Like it told, sort of built up to where it was going with the jellyfish. And Andy, Andy cut them all. He said, no, I think it disrupts the flow of it and it gives too much away. And as an author, we've all got a bit of an ego, so I was a bit put out at the time. I was like, those bits are brilliant. It goes back to the Second World War, and there's V2 facilities, and it explains all about Shutstone and all this other stuff. And then rereading it, as you often do with a good editor, you think, oh bloody hell, he was right. All along, he was right to cut them out. And I think as well, with the way you guys are describing it, which is a really nice reaction to hear for the book, that if those interludes were still in there, a lot of the surprises would have been ruined. So but now you'll be able to read them all again and see what happened with Schadengeist and how he got picked up by the. Well, I won't ruin it.
Well, we're excited for that. I've got to ask, why a symphanophore? Where does that come from? Because we actually kind of alluded on their podcast that we thought this was something you had come up with, and you had shared a link with us on Twitter saying, no, these things are real, and gave us a link to a website. Where do you get that? Where does that come up? Why? I guess, how do you come to a creature like that as your ultimate kind of monster in a book?
Well, I don't know whether you guys are familiar with Eddie Izzard, but one of the sort of little bits that he does about passive research, he'll just sit and watch TV, and it's like, oh, there's a program about sharks. Oh, I'll do some jokes about sharks then. It's like passive research. It comes to you. And I think it was a similar sort of thing where I was just online, sort of clicking around, and I saw a link to this siphonophore. So I that sounds interesting. What's that? And I clicked through and read about them, and they are fascinating creatures. Portuguese man of war?
Yes.
That's a siphonophore. That's
okay.
That's but they I don't know how much you sort of read into the little link, but they're kind of related to jellyfish, but they're not one creature. They sort of build specialized cells. So like a part of it is for eating, a part of it's for digestion, a part of it's for locomotion, and they're all these different clusters of specialized cells that work together and sort of form a whole entity, but they're actually all independent. So they're that's incredible. That's like a really interesting creature to write about. And I don't think I had. It was a siphonophore originally. And when I was developing the characters, and certainly with Mondegreen, who is a sort of Peter Sellers type, and reading about him as well, and his sort of this very kind of big and odd personality that he had. I mean, he's a very interesting but very sort of curious character to research. And that he had all these different parts, and it sort of clicked together. It's like, well, the siphonophore has all these different parts and aspects that it creates. And, sort of the model for my Mondegreen character had that kind of thing. I think it was one of those nice bits of serendipity where this random bit of trivia about a very strange sea creature that I knew played into to what I was doing anyway. And it's like, okay, oh well, then maybe I can make the bad guy, and that's where that idea came from, really.
Well, and it's so easy to, I think, say, okay, we're going to find some extraterrestrial that we're going to come up with. But in this case, it's a terrestrial being, and it's all earthbound, all earth based, and I think that's probably the most fascinating thing. Was that intentional that you said, okay, let's make it a little more grounded, let's make it, terrestrial and not have the extraterrestrial element, because we've been having that so much with the Lethbridge-Stewart series, and of course Doctor Who. Was that a obviously, the serendipity of it is the fact that you just came across it, but was it more intentional to kind of make it terrestrial based?
Yeah, I think it was certainly when I was writing it. And again, just purely to do something a little different, because we'd had, the Dominators and the Rutans and the Great Intelligence in the first series of books. And, I do love that stuff as well, don't get me wrong. Hopefully at some point in the future I might be writing another Lethbridge-Stewart. And then, I think then I'll do aliens then. I did want to, a texture I think is important, both within a novel and in a series like the Lethbridge-Stewart line. So I wanted to do something a little different, and keeping it grounded as well. One of the interesting things, obviously, the bad guy is a Nazi, and the sort of earthbound threat. And I thought it was quite a nice idea to keep it all earthbound. I mean, the Siphonophore, I hope is actually quite sort of sympathetic in the end. It's it's not an evil creature, and with the interludes as well, you'll sort of see why it's got such a grudge against Schadengeist, and it's very, very good reason, I can tell you now. Sorry, I thought I was over there. Yes, that's it. Keeping it all earthbound. And as you say, it gives it a bit of texture. It makes it a little bit different, and I don't know whether it necessarily makes it more believable. But it was deliberate, definitely.
Well, you touched on the sympathy for the character, or for the Siphonophore at the end. I keep wanting to say factum, but I suppose that's the group name for it. But I think you do get that, especially with where the creature sort of helps Lethbridge-Stewart by giving him the flashes of knowledge of what he needs to do to escape. And I think that's what nails that down, that you do have some sympathy for the creature, and you do have some sympathy for it, and relief when it's able to finally get its seclusion within the container.
Yeah, exactly. And I always wanted the ultimate villain to be Schadengeist, to be this sort of escaped Nazi war criminal. I'm glad that hopefully people will see that sort of sympathy there, because it links in a bit with the quote from Herman Melville at the start that can I get off the top of my head, something about there is no folly of the beast of the earth that is not infinitely outdone by the madness of men. And I wanted that contrast between the kind of unthinking and sort of innocent, for want of a better word, natural world, against, this man, and the way, certainly in terms of, the hideous Nazi regime, and trying to impose a sort of order upon that, which is what Schadengeist does well with this creature. And maybe a kind of little thematic thing going on there slightly.
I think it worked brilliantly. It was one of my favorite parts of the book also. I also really liked Samson Ware. Was he a character that you had brought to it, or was that a character that Andy said, well, we're thinking of adding this character and having him continue? How did that go?
Very, very much a bit of both, actually. Andy had an idea for a character that he wanted to introduce as a sort of ongoing person. And when Sean asked about the TV thing, I think the cogs in Andy's mind started ticking, and he suggested, well, maybe we can have a sort of stuntman character that we can then, he always wanted the character, who was at that point unnamed, to be ongoing. So it was. He asked me to include this new character in the book, And me and Andy, I think, had a few chats about it. Like, we wanted a person of colour as well, because we thought that would be an interesting addition to the cast, and we didn't want it to be, you know, all white blokes, which, you know, which can sometimes happen in these sorts of lines. So we wanted to make sure we had a very diverse set of characters as well. So that was something we added. And then in terms of his actual characteristics, his sort of day-to-day personality, you know, it's sort of a bit flirty and a bit Jack the Lad. I think that was mostly me. I mean, me and Andy developed the sort of rough idea of the character, and then it was up to me to kind of flesh him out in prose, I think.
One of the great things about his character, I thought, also was that he very could have easily been just another romantic interest for Anne. And while it is on his side, it wasn't for her. So it was a nice kind of, it didn't hit the trope like you kind of expect it to.
Yeah, and I wanted to make sure, very, very consciously from the start, that Anne was quite a strong as well. So it was really nice to, in some ways, I think I wrote Samson in a way that he would have that kind of fun, spiky relationship with Anne. Like, I gave him those kind of character traits that I knew would annoy Anne, just to make the scenes that they'd be in together a little more interesting. Yeah, Anne and Samson I do quite like as a pair, and I tried to give them as much time together as possible, because they do have, as you say, you know, I think Samson does have a little bit of a crush on her, but knows she's got no chance, and knows that there's very much a thing going on between her and Bill. So yeah. Well,
and he recognizes that and respects that, as opposed to trying to circumvent it and sabotage it.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, Samson is a good guy, and I think that's why Lethbridge-Stewart sort of respects him so much and wants him on board. And I'm actually really looking forward to seeing how everyone else writes him. I haven't actually got round to reading The Grandfather Infestation yet. It's on my list. But yeah, so I'm interested to see how the other authors approach him too.
What about Harold Chorley? Is he as much fun to write as he is to read?
Oh, he is. He is brilliant fun to write. Like, Chorley is, I think, him and Samson are probably my two favourite characters that I was writing in that book. Hanson was a lot of fun as well, actually, purely because he's nuts. But yeah, Chorley, because I can't remember the name of the actor who played him back in The Web of Fear. But yeah, this brilliant sort of slightly slimy, low-rent Alan Wicker that we get. And he is just so much fun, because he's got this sort of selfish, venal side to him, and you know, I think he's quite sort of distrusting. I think in his own way, like, he's quite sincere and quite, you know, I think he's dedicated to what he does. He's a dedicated journalist, but he just his own personal morality doesn't balance with that, and he's willing to, you know, just circumnavigate everything he can to get a good story. And yeah, that sort of venal, selfish journalist, I think, is quite fun. Yes, and he's a coward as well. He's such a coward, and it's always fun to write cowards, because they're the person who just wants to go, wants to leave, wants to kind of get out of here as soon as possible and save their own skin. So you can have a lot of fun with that too, especially balancing against someone like Hanson or Lethbridge-Stewart, who's totally the opposite, and it's more, you know, we've got to get in and solve the problem as opposed to run away and save our own hide, you know.
Was it a challenge to have to pick up on the aftermath of Mutually Assured Domination, where we left Chorley with kind of this scrambled idea and missing memories? Was it a challenge to kind of continue that on, or did that help kind of mold the direction that Chorley went?
A bit of both. I don't think it was difficult, because Andy had sort of filled me in with what happened towards the end of Mutually Assured Domination. So I knew it was all coming, and it gave me a chance to sort of play around with the relationships and with the conflicts that appear in the story. And obviously then you've got the big one between Chorley and Lethbridge-Stewart, because Chorley doesn't trust him, and Chorley is sure that he's got something, you know, he's hiding secrets and he's stealing people's memories and all this. So it gives you that nice dynamic between them as well, even though Chorley knows that Lethbridge-Stewart is probably his greatest asset of getting these massive scoops, you know, and he knows something dodgy is going on, and he knows he's very, very close to the scoop of a lifetime. And so he's got this, you know, tenacity that he's not going to give up. But But I think, because it would have been quite easy for us as well, I think, just to forget about the end of mutually assured domination and say, oh, surely forgot about it, or let's move on. But when I was creating Hanson as well, and the fact that he was slightly insane and his memories had gone missing as well, a little like the serendipity between, Mondegreen and the idea of the siphonophore and constituent parts. It was just one of those things that seemed to fit together quite nicely. And if we can actually do that and, give respect to Chorley as a character, basically, and have him, not just wiping the slate clean and he comes back and he's all fine again. It does make him more interesting. I think it makes him more interesting to write. It makes him a more interesting character for people to read about as well. If he does have this through line, if, his story is a continuous one and not just reset at the beginning of every book.
You mentioned earlier with your kind of a wink and a nod to the Underwater Menace.
Mm-hmm.
How it seemed rather fortuitous that the timing on that happened the way that it did, with, at least here in the States, BBC finally released Underwater Menace on DVD not too long before your book came out. And I don't know what the timeline is like on that side of the pond, that maybe it's been out far earlier, but it still is a relatively new old story.
I certainly didn't plan that at all. I think that was just sort of good luck on my part, and if the BBC can help us shift a few more copies, or we can help the BBC shift a few more copies of the Water Menace, then so much the better. It's certainly not something I planned. No. With the whole sort of "nothing in the world can stop me now." I mean, it's a classic quote anyway. But a lot of the book was influenced as well by Dr. Strangelove. I don't know whether you guys know this, but Candy Jar has actually published Peter George's his novel of Dr. Strangelove, and one of the original ideas we had, and again, this is how I think a little insight into how these things are put together and the way things work. But there was potentially we were going to have Dr. Strangelove as the villain before the Siphonophore came along. And it was going to be a sort of similar thing that played with it a lot. So you wouldn't know whether it was, the real Dr. Strangelove, or whether it was actually this insane actor who had just gone out of his mind and they believed he was Dr. Strangelove, which I think there's the hangover from that earlier on, where you're not sure whether Hanson is just insane or whether there really is a Nazi war criminal, underneath a TV station. So that had a big influence as well, this sort of Strangelove thing. And obviously, if you've seen the film, Peter Sellers' performance towards the end as Strange, sort of manic German intensity, it's insane, and absolutely beautiful, hilarious performance. And I think basically I just used the chance of this very, I think you said, this kind of cornball, very over the top villain in the form of the kind of Chardonnay clone. And it's like, well, I'll allow myself to have some fun with it. And then, so you got the Zaroff line there as well. But yeah, so it was the shot. I think the Zaroff, the Underwater Menace stuff kind of came after. I think that wasn't an idea at the start. It just sort of nudged in by mistake while I was writing it.
Was it hard to write Schottengeist's accent? Because it comes across very German. So was that difficult? Or did you kind of have to sound it out as you spelled it? Or how did that work?
Yeah, I did sort of sit there at my desk shouting out these sort of random Germanic phrases and trying to figure out, okay, phonetically, how does that work? And I think I had to go through it about 3 or 4 times before I was happy with it, and just making sure, I think for consistency more than anything else. So, you're always saying "sie" instead of "the," and that kind of thing. And so just making, I think the consistency was the hardest part, just ensuring that it flowed. And and didn't go. There was a time as well when it was even more over the top, and I cut it down a little bit.
Were you tempted to create even more of a catalog of characters for Montegreen, or did you have to kind of rail down to the ones that we got? Because quite honestly, I would have loved to have seen about a dozen more of his characters.
Yeah, there were quite a few. There were a couple of scenes, I think, with Professor Paperclip that got cut, and I think there were some more pot splits bits as well. Pot splits bits? And felt the wrath of Andy's red pen. And again, I think it was probably a good idea. Because I don't think when we had those kind of interactions with all these other characters that he played, they were quite fun, they were quite entertaining, but they didn't really drive the story forward at all. It was just a couple of kind of comic scenes where I think Paperclip sets fire to his arm with a Bunsen burner or something, and just sort of flees the sets. And yeah, I think they slowed the pace down a bit too much, because this was all towards, I think, around sort of middle of the book when Lethbridge-Stewart is visiting the studios and watching the filming. And so we had a lot more stuff there where he was actually watching the filming and kind of just be presented with this parade of just bizarre and slightly manic characters. But it just it slowed it down a bit as well. And it was actually Andy's suggestion to have Lethbridge-Stewart go off and do his little own investigation at the studios. Before, he just stood there and watched all these other characters while Chorley went off and did his thing. But yeah, Andy, I think, very, very sensibly suggested, it's like, well, no, because then Lethbridge-Stewart doesn't really do much for the first half of the book, and we need him to kind of get out there and be a bit more of a hero. So yeah, which is why he goes and has a scrap with one of the guards instead now. So those interactions with the characters were there, but they got swapped around for an action sequence. I don't know if that's a good exchange or not, but there you go. Yeah. It was a lot of fun to write. So,
sounds like it.
Okay. Yeah, and
sounds like it was as much fun to write as it was to read.
Well, this is it. One of the best pieces of writing advice I ever got was from an old tutor of mine, and she said, if you don't enjoy reading it, if you don't enjoy writing it, they sure as hell won't enjoy reading it. And it's so true. You've got to have fun, and I think when you're creating characters as well, it's important to create them so that they're going to be fun to write. Or creating someone like Hansen or Samson. And it's just sort of entertaining to set up those relationships and kind of watch them spark off each other. Do you know what I mean? Just so there's tension there, and it's interesting. It's basically getting people to argue, I think, is how I do it. It's just set things up to give people enough stuff to get annoyed at each other about, and then they can have an argument, and then you can have some good, fun character stuff with arguments. So, yeah. If you're looking to write, set up characters going to argue with each other, I think. It's a good place to start.
Natural conflict.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And the more characters you have to play with as well, the more conflict you can generate, and the more instances of people arguing again can come up. Yeah.
What was the origin of the testing rooms? I felt as I was going through the book that, as you mentioned earlier, it's very grounded. It's very real world. We've got a television studio, and despite all the fantastical things that are created there, one of the best bits in my mind was when Chorley and Lethbridge-Stewart both kind of commenting on, oh, look, styrofoam and little twinkling lights are making this on that. But then we get underneath the studio, and we have this labyrinthine maze of testing rooms, and very high tech, very almost, and this was one of the things that I kind of felt helped lend to the, well, maybe there is an alien influence going on here, because this seems something much grander than what a studio schmuck is going to come up with for his lair.
I think that was another little hangover from the days when we were going to have Strange Stuff as the villain. Because obviously towards the end of the Kubrick film, Dr. Strangelove's grand plan is to, build all these mine shafts and getting people to live in all these sort of underground mine shafts that are all tunneled out. And when I had Strangelove as the villain, this, like, his plan had something to do with that. He wanted to make this come to fruition. And when we decided that Strangelove probably wasn't the best idea, we thought it might have been a little bit too knowing, a little bit too arch. So we scrapped it. But I did still like the idea of this sort of potential Nazi war criminal and these sort of hideous testing rooms where he kind of decides where people are worthy or not. And so, yeah, I kind of kept that over basically from the Strangelove side of it. And I had to develop it a little bit, obviously, when adding the siphonophore and Schadengeist being a slightly different character from the one I was originally envisioning writing. I think if we'd have gone with Strangelove, it probably would have been hopefully a little less unsettling, probably would have been a bit funnier. Whereas now I think, because, Schadengeist is a despicable human being in every respect, like, hopefully then we could make it a little more sinister. Silly as it is with the sort of duplicate Schadengeist ranting and raving and doing his thing. But yeah, hopefully it's dangerous enough. But then there's the feeling, I also wanted to evoke some of those great, 60s TV shows, The Prisoner, and I think that sort of slightly surreal aspect of it is borrowed a little from the Avengers. And yeah, so I think that's where more little homages you get to the older 60s TV shows is in the testing room areas, I think.
Well, what else do you have coming up on the horizon? Is there anything else we can look forward to reading from you soon?
Hopefully, yeah. I mean, Andy did mention the possibility of doing another Lethbridge-Stewart at some point. So you never know what's going to happen there. I don't know. I think there are a few exciting new authors lined up for the next few months as well. So it'd be definitely interesting to have a look at those guys coming up. But yeah, hopefully, who knows, another Lethbridge-Stewart at some point. Hint, hint, Andy, if he's listening to this, because I need the money. But also, I've been working on a few ideas as well for another thing. And interestingly, it's going to be a little bit science fiction. Again, I feel like I might have a better chance of selling it if it's science fiction, which is... And it sort of ties in a bit to the Showstoppers. I feel like I've done a lot of research for it when writing the Showstoppers, but it's going to be a sort of, hopefully, a modern version of Don Quixote, except the kind of Don Quixote character is going to stop the horrible, gritty reboot of an old 60s TV show, and they're going to do this sort of nasty, gritty reboot of it. And so his Don Quixote mission is just to stop the reboot happening. And he's mad. He's mad as a box of frogs, this guy. So hopefully that's going to be quite fun. But it's still...
If it's half as good as Showstoppers, it'll be a fantastic story.
You absolutely must keep us in the loop on that one.
Yes, definitely.
I'm already salivating. I want to read this.
I do need to write it first. It might take me a little while, but yeah, I've got a synopsis ready, so it's getting there. It's definitely getting there. But yeah, who knows when that'll be ready? But hopefully soon.
Well, Jonathan, we want to thank you very much for taking some time to discuss the Showstoppers, and as you know, we've made no secret about it. It is a fantastic read, and we thoroughly enjoyed it, and look forward to reading more from you on the Lethbridge-Stewart if that happens.
Yep, hopefully, and thanks for having me. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's been fantastic talking to you, and it's nice to have a enthusiastic discussion about all this stuff. So yeah, it's wonderful to talk to you.
Terrific. All right, well, if that's gonna do it for this side trip, until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.